All right, so today we're going to be going over just how to interact between different systems within space teams, some more complex interactions than what you've seen in the past. In the past, it's been just one system performing some simple actions, but now we're going to have multiple systems that are talking to each other and sharing states in between different entities. Okay, so there's a new symconfig here. This is just an example of like, say there's a landing vehicle going down to a planet, and it's trying to share power between itself and an onboard rover, that kind of thing. So if we go through this, let's first check out, we can hide the sim entity. We don't need that one. Let's take a look at the entities. Spectator is the exact same. It's the same kind of camera setup as we've seen. Um, and there's this planetary exploration transport is what that stands for in this case. And it has a power and a CO2 scrubber system on it. Okay, so the power is going to provide power to all the components on board, and the CO2 scrubber is going to use power to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, basically. And we also have an LTV. It's a lunar terrain vehicle, basically just a rover that's on board the PET. It also has a CO2 scrubber on it, and you'll notice it doesn't have its own power. So when it's connected, it's going to try to use the PET's power to kind of feed its own CO2 scrubber, right? So that's kind of the architecture here. If we go up to check out the systems, right, here's power system. Just give it the correct file path and no extra parameters, just you know, what it's looping at. Same thing with the CO2 scrubber. So how do we give it any data at all to input it? Well, let's come back down to these entities, and we'll find here under the PET, we have some new params. They're all doubles. They're all just scalar parameters. The power available here is set to 1,000, just some random number as an example. It hasn't consumed any power yet, so we set that to 0. And at sim start, we have some carbon dioxide partial pressure. Okay. For the LTV, we also have not consumed any power, but we also don't have any available power. We have to get that from the PET. And then over here, we have a partial pressure as well. It's assumed to be the same just for this example, right? So let's go into what these systems are actually doing. Let's start with the power system. So everything up here is the exact same. Everything is literally the same as we've seen, all the way up until you get down here. Um, and then you have a reference to that landing vehicle. And then you basically see like power is only on the PET, right? It's only on that lander. So when you do a for entity in entities, you'll only be affecting that lander. So what do we do here? Well, we check how much power is available, right? And then we basically uh, check here, like who is using the power, right? Um, in this case, it's just the PET. So that's the only one that's using any power. Then we subtract that from the total power that's available. And then we set the power consumed to 0 again because we're not, like after we've used it, we're not using it anymore, right? And then we set the total power available to that new modified value. So if we had multiple entities that were using this power system, we would basically have this looping through all of them and then subtracting all the power that they're consuming from the total available power, and then we'll be resetting that after every component has added its own like power draw contribution, right? Just a very simple example of how to set up a resource like that. You can get a lot more complicated with any of this, but basically this is you know just a very basic power sim. And of course we sleep a system for the correct time interval, and then the rest is all the exact same. Now for the CO2 scrubber system, everything is again the same through here. The only difference here is this is applied to both entities, both the PET and the rover, right? So uh, for like here, what we set is we set the power consumed to be just some value, right? So we're consuming power as a function of just using the system, right? And then we're also modifying the partial pressure, right? We're saying if we're able to draw power, right, then we can take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And this is a very unrealistic value, right? We'll probably change that to something a little smaller because we're going to go into negative CO2 very, very quickly here. But um, basically, this is going to take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere if we have power. There's no condition here on is the power greater than or equal to zero. We could put that in here. We could say, well, if the power that's available to us is greater than or equal to zero, then, you know, um, do all of this. Otherwise, just skip it, let carbon dioxide accumulate. You could get as complicated as you want with this, but this is just a basic example of that. So let's go back to the sim config. And we also have a couple things here. Let's open up the spectator. So a couple of gadgets that are useful if you're trying to see like, okay, do we have the correct numbers coming in? Is everything looking correct, right? Put these two gadgets onto your spectator. They're entity details and actually outliner and entity details. And you can also have the mark selected one if you want to be able to select whatever entity. But these are the two important ones, right? The outliner is going to tell you every entity that's in your sim. And entity details is going to give you details on all the params that a selected entity has. Okay, so see it in action. Let's open up Space Teams and let's see it working. So I have the sim already loaded up here. If I didn't, I would say, okay, PET. There it is, right? Just click on it and confirm. So now see, here's what this particular sim looks like here. I'm gonna fly out of here. We can see there's some kind of lander vehicle with a bunch of thrusters on. Let's brighten that. And then you see there's a rover right next to it. It doesn't really matter what the relative positions are. This is just an example. But basically what's going on is if we put up the outliner, what we can see we have both these available and we can check all the parameters in them, right? So it looks like we're still going negative on CO2 partial pressure. Whatever, it's just an example. If you want to make it realistic, have an exponential drop off, something like that, right? But you can see the param is being set in real time here. Here's the power that's available. It's also dropping. And the power consumed is, as you can see, it's going up to 0.2, sometimes back to 0. It's going up to 0.2, taking it away from the available power, and then dropping it back to 0 for the power that's being consumed on that particular iteration. As for the LTV, right, if we check this out, again, CO2 partial pressure is going very negative, whatever, no big deal. That just means it's a bad model, but the system is working exactly as intended. And the power that we've consumed here keeps increasing. Okay, so that makes sense. Okay, so that's about it for doing very simple system interactions and using what you've learned before and this new kind of framework of passing parameters between certain entities by between systems rather by using an entity that has those params. You can hopefully construct a sim that's a lot more complicated and physically realistic.